song is Subterranean Terror by White Bat Audio. What's going on, everybody? It's B-Show Brian J here with another edition of Horror Reanimated, the show where we try to bring new life to some of the horror franchises that you love and some that you don't love. This week, Benny Slash, my co-host, is off. He's getting married, poor bastard. And a friend of mine who I've had some contact with over the past few years, someone that I interacted with years ago from the old Halloween message boards back in the day, and I've become a friend with on Facebook. From Salt Lake City, Utah, is my friend Vincent C. What's up, Vince?
Hey, how are you?
Pretty good tonight. The original concept for this podcast started when I read an early script or draft of a movie. And it really fascinated me because when we think about horror films we love, or even films in general, there's not always a lot of new ground to break. And with some of these franchises, like A Nightmare on Elm Street now or Friday the 13th, we likely won't get any more movies or even comic books or anything like that for a while. So originally I was drawn to the idea of checking out stuff that we'd never seen or things that were changed. And when I was talking to you a while ago, you mentioned that you had a manuscript for, what was it, the novelization for Halloween 3?
Yes, I do.
Okay. How did you, come across that, or how did it come to your possession?
So, first thing is that the Halloween 3 novel is my favorite novel of all time. And I reached out to Dennis Etchison about a couple years ago. And lo and behold, through an assistant of his, I actually got a hold of him and we became friends. And he told me that he was actually approached by the producers of the then upcoming Halloween movie about maybe contributing ideas, and they were interested in his Halloween 4 screenplay from 87 or 88 that was never coming to fruition. And upon finding the screenplay, he found the original manuscripts for the Halloween 2 and 3 novelizations. And and he knew that it was my favorite novel. And, like I said, we became friends, we got to talking, and he let me have it. And it's actually my favorite thing in the world that I own.
Wow. That's fascinating. So Dennis, is he still alive?
No, sadly, Dennis passed away a few months ago.
Oh, that's what I heard. I thought I remembered that. I was hoping it wasn't true, but sorry to hear about that if he was a friend of yours.
Yes, thank you.
How did you become friends with him? Just reaching out to him, or?
I reached out to him. I forget exactly why. I think I was interested in doing a project regarding the Halloween 3 novel and figuring out who owned the rights to it. So he had a sort of a makeshift website that an assistant made, and I contacted them. And apparently Dennis was in the right mood to want to talk about Halloween because of the of the newly found interest in the series due to the new movie coming up. So he was more prone to want to talk about the series than usual, and he became really enthusiastic about talking to me, and we just had some really cool conversations on the phone. That's how it happened.
So you only became friends with him really at the end of his life, right? Like the past probably 2 or 3 years?
Pretty much the last 1.5 or so years of his life, yes.
No kidding. Man, that's unfortunate. But some people may not know, as you mentioned, he wrote a screenplay for John Carpenter for Halloween 4. It was a film that I believe... I'm trying to remember the production company that wanted to make it, but I think they had done Texas Chainsaw 3, potentially. And I did a different episode of a different podcast about this about 2 years ago, but I actually have what is believed to be not an actual copy of his screenplay, but obviously a text copy of the PDF of the screenplay. Did I send that to you a while back?
You have, and I haven't really looked into it, to be honest. So you have a PDF of the Halloween 4 screenplay?
Yes, and I know someone posted it on archive.org, but it's like a really wonky text file, and it's really weird formatted. So if you want, I can probably set up a Dropbox or something and get another copy to you. But
That would be really cool.
Yeah.
Dennis read a scene to me over the phone, which was really cool. And but I haven't had much interest in the Halloween 4 screenplay, but enough interest that I would like to get around to reading it. So thank you for offering that.
Yeah. It's definitely worth the read, and I know it's legit because I read it, and then he did an interview a few months later and kind of confirmed some of the scenes that were in it and the tone. So I know it's at least in the right wheelhouse. So I'll see if I can get that to you. I know I can get that to you. But
oh well, thanks.
The one thing I can say that's very complimentary about his work is when you read the Halloween 4 script anyway, and it's probably the same thing with the manuscript from Halloween 3's novelization. He has such a way of painting a picture in your mind to where there were scenes in the Halloween 4 script, and not to get off on that, we can talk about that another time, but there was a scene in like a pumpkin patch where he describes not only a girl slipping on these pumpkins and them smashing underneath her, but then the ghost of the shape, Michael Myers, like bursts from these pumpkins and they just go everywhere like an avalanche. And it's like, I can see it in my mind, like the colors and the pumpkins and the explosion, like right now as I talk to you about it. And I haven't read the script in I think 2 years. So the Halloween 3 one must have been a fascinating read too.
It was. It's if you ever read the novel, it's a fascinating read. I have probably read about 90% of his short stories, in which there are so many from the past 50 years of his life. And I've read a few of his novels, and I honestly believe that Halloween 3 is the best thing that he's ever written. But then again, I haven't really checked out the 4 screenplay, so that that could be better. But he is a very vivid writer. And the novel is just brilliant. So if you're the way you're describing the scene in the Halloween 4 screenplay, that's really interesting. I would love to check that out.
I'll definitely get it to you. One thing I was wondering is, one of the things that draws me to these scripts or movies that haven't been made is, again, just rediscovering things, or sometimes they bring new depth to the film. Go ahead and talk about the manuscript, and does it glean any more information about the story? Does it go into depth that we don't see in the film? Does it add anything to the mythology? And that's a lot to throw at you, so just go ahead and answer however you want.
No, that's okay. The manuscript doesn't really deviate much from the finished novel, but there are plenty of scenes in the novel / manuscript that are not in the movie. Plenty of scenes. And, I would say first, the biggest difference between the manuscript and the finished novel is that Dennis definitely grappled with a lot of lines and did a lot of edits that, somebody like us would find really interesting. How he changed things around as a writer and how he tweaked things, his handwritten notes, some really fascinating stuff. But the manuscript starts with a scene that's not in the movie, and it's a scene. I'm pretty sure that just about every scene in the novel that is not in the movie is a scene that Dennis wrote himself. Because by the time he was given a screenplay, it had Tommy Lee Wallace's hands on it. So as far as I know, I think I heard that he did not have a copy of the Nigel Neal script. But the novel / manuscript starts with a scene in which Challis is slumped over in the hospital break room, and he's pretty much dead to the world. And Nurse Agnes comes into the room. He's not moving, and she realizes how overworked he is and how he's just, kind of staying there still. It almost gets to the point where you wonder if this character Challis really is dead. In fact, the first 3 words of the novel are Challis was dead. And, so that goes on for a while, and she turns on the television, and then he kind of gets up from his stupor or whatever you would call it, and is kind of fed up with Halloween by that point, tells her to turn it down. And they have a conversation basically about how his life has been falling apart, and the wife and the kids, etc. And she thinks that he should really take some much needed rest away from the hospital. So that's the first scene. That's basically the prologue, and it's very well written. The second scene that I'll mention, and there are others, is the next one that's not in the movie, in which he goes to the. I can't believe this is not in the movie. He goes to the convenience store to find some masks for his children, and it really what Dennis did with the manuscript in the novel was he really got into Challis's head, and that's the biggest difference. To answer your question, is that you really get to see what goes on in his mind and what he's thinking and feeling, and it makes it for a really great character experience.
It seems too like he's trying to make him a more heroic character than we ended up getting.
Sort of, yes. I mean, Etchison does not mince words in implying that Challis is kind of I don't want to call him a loser, but he's estranged from his wife. They're divorced.
Hey, he's the man. What are you talking about?
Oh no, he is the man. But Etchison kind of not maybe a loser, but he kind of paints him in an almost pitiful light.
Yeah, I know he is.
His wife is out of the picture, and she's sort of a money grubbing pain in the neck in the novel, and the children, they don't really respect him, and he's overworked and overtired, and you really get a sense of what he's like as a person. But he is heroic, and as you know, he redeems himself, and it's up to him to kind of save the day. And that's actually something that I wanted to mention, is that in Etchison's short stories and even his novels, a common theme, and you may know this, is that it's always or often about a man or a person who stumbles upon an underground plot and realizes that he or she must step up to do something about it. And when he was given the material for Halloween 3, he probably fell in love with it, because that's what he'd been writing about for years, about these underground plots in which something must be done. And he does become the hero. And it sort of falls right into the hands of what Etchison loves to tell stories about.
Yeah, there wasn't much of that in the Halloween 4 script. I don't know if he was... I can't say that, because you had Deputy Hunt and Sheriff Brackett both had two like completely different opinions, and they were trying to work together. And Hunt seems kind of broken and haunted, but like has to step up at the end, and he's kind of... I don't want to ruin it, but he's kind of like... what's the word? Anyway, I'll let you read it and figure it out. But
no,
like he's playing with his revolver and almost suicidal, and stuff like that.
Really? Wow.
Okay. But it's very like fleeting stuff. Like when they're talking about Michael coming back, like he wakes. I think there's a scene where like he wakes up and he grabs his revolver, and for a split second you kind of wonder like if he's gonna kill himself, but then he like gets dressed and goes outside. It's like real subtle stuff, but yeah. I guess
dark?
It's I would describe it I describe it as a combination of I don't know, A Nightmare on Elm Street mixed with Wes Craven's New Nightmare.
Okay.
I mean, I hate to use two films from the same franchise, but basically this, I don't know, it's been talked about that the fear of Michael Myers kind of brings back this phantom in the form of the shape of Michael Myers. He's almost like the ghost of Halloween, and things start happening in the town, and it's like the weird psychic energy starts to manifest in a ghostly yet physical. It's weird. It really kind of it teeters the line of physical and supernatural.
Mm-hmm.
Because like it's like a ghost that comes out of nowhere and goes away, almost like a fog does, where it'll flow in and then dissipate. It's kind of like Michael does, but he's a flesh, and it's weird. It's like a flesh and blood Myers that disappears and comes back.
Oh, that's really interesting. It sounds like a big departure from what Etchison typically wrote about, but that makes it all the more intriguing for me to want to read.
Yeah. So, and I don't want to get too far off of that because the Halloween 3 stuff is really good. But that's what I was kind of gleaning from what you were saying is he added a lot more for you to hang your hat on with Challis, because if you watch Halloween 3, Challis, there's a stark difference between he's slumped over, almost dead, overworked, and he's picking up a six-pack and going to chase some tail and investigate some killer Halloween masks. You know what I mean?
Right, exactly. So, you really do appreciate how, as one person put it, Etchison was given this character, Challis, and he kind of cracked open his head and, wanted to see what was inside, and he kind of played around and came up with one of his best characters.
Yeah, and I know this series, my regular co-host and I, we've talked about some of the episodes being things like this, like reviewing manuscripts, transcripts, scripts, screenplays. But then part of it also us doing almost like a pitch room for other movies or crossovers, because we've done stuff like that in the past. And like, if you look at Challis, and this maybe will be fodder for another episode down the road, if you take Challis, if he did save the day, he could have been almost he could have been like an iconic hero and almost like an action horror star. Almost like what's his name, Ash Williams became.
Yeah.
You could easily spin off, just a Challis series after Halloween 3. You
could. That would definitely be something I would want to read.
Yeah, it would be interesting. It's funny to, if you could have gone back in time and put the bug in somebody's ear, especially if you're saying Etchison wrote really well for Dr. Challis, to see, hey man, what if we made him like part Arnold Schwarzenegger, part Al Bundy? You know what I mean? Like, he's not like this, not this big jacked heroic dude, but he's gonna get off his late shift, he's gonna pick up his six pack, he's gonna grab a broad, and he's gonna stumble upon some mystery, Scooby-Doo style.
It's as Etchison actually wrote it, he had to come up with a Herculean effort to save the day. And I'm afraid that Etchison probably would not have been interested in continuing the Challis character. I think he probably liked the ambiguity of whether or not everybody just died at the end. Etchison wasn't much of a sequel person. Maybe that's why he liked Halloween 3, because it didn't really continue upon something else prior to it, just in name only. But then again, he did do Halloween 4, so there's always that possibility that he would have liked to continue upon the Challis character. As a friend of his, I definitely would have recommended it, because he made that character interesting. Not that the character is not interesting in the movie, but he really took it and did something with it. Made this kind of guy who was almost pitiful in a way. He's not written as a womanizer in the book. He's just this sort of everyman, everyday kind of person, and he redeems himself, and that's what makes for a great character arc. And I think that given the opportunity, you never know. Maybe he would have. Maybe Etchison would have continued upon that. I know that people like you and I would have definitely enjoyed that, because Challis is sort of a hero for us.
Yeah, like even if it was, and again, this is pie in the sky, would probably never happen, but. We saw Ash versus Freddy versus Jason comic. There's 2 comic series that came out of that. I think one was called The Nightmare Warriors. So, even if it was like a limited 5-issue or 6-issue run of like a comic, it was like, The Adventures of Dan Challis or something. And it's interesting you noted the ambiguity. So in his manuscript, there was no finite ending. Did it end exactly the stop it, turn it off as the movie did? It mentions the third network, ABC, which did not turn off the commercial. And he's yelling for it to stop at the end. And the last paragraph is sort of about a wailing, sheer kind of scream that permeates through the air. And you just get the sense of dread that, that the plan didn't work out, kind of like the movie implies. Yeah. I think that's one of the most heartbreaking things of the film, and I think I don't know if it's because it was subtle and we get beaten over the head with things so much nowadays watching movies that everything's got to be, you got to be beaten over the head with it. It's got to be ground into you that you understand this and spelled out. The film is about an evil guy trying to like carry out this worldwide sacrificial calling through a practical joke on the kids by essentially using their innocence to sell them these Halloween masks and use them as like this deliverer of this plague. So like not only is he murdering children, but he's bringing about essentially the end of humanity with them as a vessel. And I think that's something that really goes overlooked, and it's not subtle when you talk about it. But when you watch the film, and maybe it's because little Buddy Comfort was such a miserable son of a bitch that like you're pulling for him and like you don't really care that he dies in some way, the character anyway. But I mean, you do. But they lessen the blow a little bit. But to me, that is one of the most heartbreaking things is when I think there's the scene where Challis he's tied up and they put the Halloween mask on him, and he's kind of like it's a callback to when his son's in front of the TV watching it. Mm-hmm. And you can tell he has that realization of like, oh my God, my kids are going to die. And I don't know if that's really spoken to in the story. I would assume he kind of goes into some of that, but yeah, I don't know, man. There's so much of that movie that gets overlooked and forgotten about, but has such magnitude. Yes, definitely. And,
that's a really good scene that I'm looking at right now in the novel, in which you have some extended dialogue between Challis and Cochrane. Cochrane describes what he's about to do as a lovely kind of thing that surpasses one's wildest dreams. He's a real bastard in the novel, by the way. And he says a plague is on them, the children. Now think of that in 50 million homes. And he goes on to talk about sacrifices and how God is a quaint word, and just going on about ignorance and, sort of implying that, a lot of things that we do are the product of ignorance and self-righteousness. It gets pretty heavy in the novel. And, the manuscript surely, gives you some insight into the back and forth, not only between the two characters, but the back and forth in Etchison's mind as he puts this sort of social commentary forward and, grapples upon how he wants to convey that to the reader. It's some really heavy stuff.
Did he share any of his thoughts on all this with you and like the deeper meanings and what was going on in his head when he wrote for this?
He did. We talked about the opening scene more than anything, in which he really grappled with the opening line, Challis was dead. As a matter of fact, he wrote it and crossed it out at least 4 times. And I thought that was very interesting. And I asked him if it was supposed to be implied to the reader if the character was supposed to actually be dead and if he was reanimated by the thunderstorm, because it seemed like he really was dead in the first few pages of the book. But Etchison said no, it really just meant he was dead to the world. But if you read it, it could really look as if the character was dead. Challis was slumped forward. He was not moving, etc. And sort of implied later in the scene by Agnes that this is a man who matters, that he can do good in the world, that he can make a difference, and that if the Lord just helps him out and listens to his prayers and his thoughts, that he could provide a lot of good out there to the world. And she wrote. Etchison wrote, and Nurse Agnes says she's a very pious woman. This man matters. He can make a difference. I believe he can, before it drifts into the first chapter of the book. And Etchison, I guess to answer your question, he wrote it in 3 weeks. He met he meant for most of it to be taken literally. So I read a lot into this book, but I think he got everything out on the page that he intended to, and I think he had a lot of fun writing it, actually.
Was he a fan of the movie, or did he ever share his thoughts on the movie, or was it more about his work?
The Halloween 3 movie?
Yeah.
He didn't really talk about the movies. He talked about, stuff in general, such as his friendship with John Carpenter and, how he felt about Deborah Hill. I don't think we really discussed anything about the movie, actually.
Okay. Is there? You mentioned a couple of scenes already. Is there anything else that really stood out as either different or deeper, or was it mostly like the Challis and the opening scene and setting that up? And
well, there are a few more scenes. There's this terrifying scene actually that I want to tell you about, in which they're driving to Santa Mira. Ellie's behind the wheel, and he falls into a dream, and it's actually one of the best written scenes in the novel. Basically, he's in a town that's very familiar, and the clock is in the sky, and it's about to turn 9 o'clock. It's about to have some kind of significance, but he's not sure what it is. And to make a long story short, there's this tall figure that appears throughout the beginning of the novel, wherever he's walking, and now the figure is in his actual dream. And there are children, you can hear them crying. They're behind false faces, which are implied to be masks. And basically this shape, this dark figure, is dressed in a black robe. As the novel says, it had no face, only blank, fleshy white skin with no discernible features and icy eyes lost behind dark slits. It was a face without guilt or remorse or compassion or any vestige of human feeling. Now, does that remind us of somebody?
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's terrifying because the children trust this figure, who's a little, the figure is, I think, at one point said to be dressed vaguely like a priest, but then you have this paragraph here. And then the figure produced a long shining device from beneath its robe. The object gleamed there long and curved and silver red in the eye of the sunrise, a knife. And before the slaughter happens upon the children, the figure laughs like a maniac, and Challis wakes up from his sleep. But even though there are some obvious differences, it does kind of remind us of somebody we know. And this figure is sort of taunting and haunting Challis in real life as he goes to the convenience store, as he's driving. And, it's stuff like that makes for a really engaging read.
Man,
because there's definitely some kind of references going on here.
And it's weird. I don't know if it was intentional or, Halloween definitely, the whole series definitely has some connections, almost references to like this ancient evil that's always existed. Michael almost seems like a vessel for it in some of the movies. In Halloween 6, obviously he's cursed as this vessel, and they don't really quite figure it out. I'd love to talk to Daniel Ferens about that sometime. But and in this case, Michael's not in the movie. It's about witchcraft. But again, you have this robed character who's going to carry out, these murders or the sacrifice of these children. But he kind of resembles the face of evil, as we know.
Exactly.
So it's interesting. It would be interesting to see, as people write these stories, obviously they come up with a lot of subtext that doesn't even hit the page. And it's all, in their mind, motivations for characters and the world and the universe. So it'd be interesting to see how interconnected these are, and if it's like this this unconscious universal evil. I don't know.
I think you hit the nail on the head. The mythology of Halloween is something that's always been an interest of mine, and fortunately, the novels expound upon that. If you read the original Halloween 1 novel by Curtis Richards,
Yes,
the prologue is some really deep stuff. It tells a story about one of Michael's possible ancestors who was cursed, and how it's implied that it bleeds down upon generation by generation, and all these bad things happen. And I heard that the Halloween 4 screenplay by Etchison delves a little bit into the mythology too. The Halloween 3 manuscript definitely does, as well as the novel, especially in the scenes where Cochran is talking to Challis, who is tied up, and then afterwards, when Challis and Ellie are making their getaway in the car, Challis has some time to reflect upon upon the evils that make their way into our lives, and how motion pictures and pop culture. It reminds me of New Nightmare in a way, which you mentioned, because it's sort of implied in the manuscript that pop culture finds a way to bleed into the real world where you can't really tell the difference. And as long as that stuff is paid attention to, then horrors in real life will find its way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's kind of reminds me of something Wes Craven said on, I think it was Masters of Horror. It was like on Showtime or something. There was interviews with him and Carpenter and Tobe Hooper and Dario Argento. And he said something about, some nuns came up to him after some ceremony in L.A., and they said, how do you write about these terrible things that happen? And he's like, well, what world do you live in? I mean, like, scary shit happens every day. Terrible things happen. People die, bombings, war. What world do you live in? That's what inspires me.
Wow. Yeah, definitely. And horror has always been an outlet for allowing us to make sense of all the crazier stuff that happens in real life.
Yeah, actually, I think you may have seen the article too. Someone just did a study, it might have been a couple years old, about why we watch horror movies, why we go on roller coasters. And it is a catharsis. It's a way, and it's like, I've had run-ins with a sister-in-law of mine. I love her very much. But she's very sensitive to certain social issues because she advocates for a certain group of people. I'll just say that. And sometimes we'll crack jokes and she just gets really upset and she doesn't understand. Some people just have a gallows sense of humor, and then that's how I deal with things. I think I've told this on a different podcast before. I don't know if you're a wrestling fan or at least familiar with wrestling.
That was actually Dennis's favorite thing to talk about. He was crazy about wrestling.
Oh,
but please
my
go
God.
ahead.
Which, is it true that John Carpenter wrote for, I don't think it was Pro Wrestling Illustrated, but he was a writer for a wrestling magazine?
Etchison, I'm pretty sure it was.
Really? Wow.
And there was nothing that he liked to talk about more than wrestling.
So you might get this then. At my grandma's funeral, and she had Alzheimer's for like 13 years. And
wow.
It's like 6 a.m. I'm there with my cousins, and my one cousin from Texas, Dan, is a huge wrestling fan, actually got me into wrestling. And I'm standing there with my brothers, who, of course, grew up watching it with me. And the funeral director walks up, and he says, "Are you the pallbearers?" And I just clasped my hands and went, "Oh, yes!" Like the Undertaker's crazy manager, Paul Bearer. This is 6:30 in the funeral chapel, like next to the casket.
Right.
And like 3 people looked at me and laughed. The funeral director, the assistant, and like one of my brothers looked at me like they were going to kill me. I tell that story because for people that get it, it may be humorous, but like that's how I deal with really horrible shit in my life. And that's also what this piece had talked about, is we watch these terrible films because it's a safe environment for us to take a look at these horrible things, to experience them in a controlled manner to where we know that we're not in danger, it's at arm's distance away, but we can actually go through these stressful situations and fire those fight or flight responses internally and then come out on the other side. So almost like, I guess you could relate it to like a vision quest when, like, a Native American brave goes out into the desert and experiences the elements, and then when he comes out of it on the other side, he has this profound vision. I think you could, I guess, glean that from horror films if you want to. I mean, there's obviously deeper meanings to these things than just, guys stabbing people in dark clothing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And, it reminds me how there's a lot of social commentary in Etchison's, in his manuscript. And I'm not sure about the screenplay, but I can tell you that, Nigel Neal definitely made it a lot deeper than the movie suggests. But, Etchison goes as far as to say that, I'll read you a short paragraph. This year's dark venture was like a rerun on the late, very late show, an endless loop reenacting the last reels of the same relentless stalking of the heart of the American dream. And that's some really deep shit.
Yeah.
And, I guess what I would say to a paragraph like that is that, these horrific things that we talk about have happened in several kinds of incarnations, throughout time. And, right after that passage, he kind of implies that, we were saying about pop culture. I guess I really think that horror is, like you said, a cathartic thing in which we make sense of and we deal with the craziness of real life. And, for a book to go as far as to suggest that Cochran is, not only killing 50 million children, which is bad enough, but he's actually putting a nail in the coffin against the American dream. I guess it really speaks to, some of these themes that, that the stakes are a lot higher than what you see at face value. That there's something even more horrific and obscene going on than is played upon on the surface. That this Cochran person not only wants to ruin lives, but he also wants to ruin the American dream, the spirit, by destroying what everybody holds sacred to them. And, that reminds me of reality and what you were saying about, this cathartic thing that happens when we delve ourselves into horror and try to make sense of it.
Yeah, no, that's great. It's like he wants to take a stake through the heart of the American dream itself.
Yeah.
And, man, it's funny, but, people ask me sometimes, why do you watch that stuff? How can you watch that crazy stuff? And I have a professional job, and sometimes when clients find out that I'm a horror nut, they're like, wow, how can you watch that? And I'm like, why would you not? A lot of times, at least, and if you're good on time, I think we've already gone a little over 30. Are you good?
No, I'm good. Thanks.
Okay. And people will ask me that, and they'll just be so surprised. And I'm like, horror in some cases is like the canary in the coal mine. Horror is like the crazy Ralph or the Donald Pleasance character, Sam Loomis, where like everyone just kind of, there's this fringe person and they're making some noise and they're crazy, they don't pay attention. And then some, wild shit goes down and everyone turns around and goes, what's going on? And they're standing there like, I've been fucking trying to tell you for however long and you're not listening. And a lot of times horror, like it starts to bubble up. And I don't know if you noticed this, but there's, obviously there's a lot of political unrest and social justice unrest right now. Not to get into politics, but just saying, things are tense right now. And
right.
If you notice, about 2 or 3 years before that, horror started a little bit of a resurgence.
Okay.
So, obviously we had the election a few years ago, but I think it was a year or two before that we had Get Out come out.
That's true.
Was that 2015 or 2016?
I think it was 16.
Okay, so like the same year of the election, right?
Right. Well, yeah, you have movies like The Purge and
Yeah.
Don't Breathe. So yeah, I think you're on to something there.
Yeah. So even if it wasn't like way before, it was around the same time. You, like you said, The Purge, Don't Breathe. You had Bird Box hit on Netflix. Obviously, Halloween 2018 was released, and that's an anniversary movie. But it's interesting to see that horror kind of coming back into the mainstream a little bit and seeing this resurgence and this newfound life. As far as, there's a lot of people who wouldn't be watching horror movies that are watching horror movies right now. Even Alien. Was it Alien Resurrect? No, not Resurrection. Covenant.
Oh, okay.
So like even
Yeah.
movies, like I'm just saying, even these darker, other side of the tracks type movies started gaining steam and popularity, around the same time we have all this kind of political and social unrest right now. And to me, I've always kind of viewed horror as like that, crazy Ralph, canary in the coal mine, kind of chirping, making noise, and no one's watching it except for the people who are into that sort of thing. So it's kind of interesting that Etchison would take things that deep, but I think a lot of people would be surprised if they really dug in and paid attention to these movies from a philosophical standpoint, really how much weight they carry.
Exactly. And your words made me think about the original Halloween, whether it's the movie or the book. With Halloween, one of the things that Halloween is really about in terms of story is it's about people not paying attention. And I think we do need to pay attention, not just politically and socially, but in our personal lives, what our family's going through, what our friends are going through. We have to pay attention to what's going on in the world. And as these horror movies suggest, if you don't pay attention, you could get into a lot of trouble. And so by that token, it doesn't really surprise me that there's a link between, horror making a resurgence and, these things happening in the world that we need to pay attention to. I think horror is trying to tell us something. Do you think so?
Yeah, I definitely think so. And I think that, you could look, the great thing about movies, like, did you see The Joker?
I haven't seen that yet.
Okay. So I won't go into detail or spoil anything, but when the movie came out, I saw right-wing people saying, this is about Antifa and the evils of blah, blah, blah and mob rule. And then I saw left-wing people saying, no, this is about Trump and it's anti-Trump and anti-capitalist. But if you take a step back, the great thing about the film is it essentially was just holding up a mirror to the audience. And yeah, it was about mob rule. It was about, in some cases, Antifa. It was in some cases about Donald Trump. It was in some cases about, the rich and the poor and the haves versus the have-nots. There was a mental illness, obviously, is definitely high on the priority list there. But the great thing about this film, and films like Halloween, and films like Night of the Living Dead, is they have a message and they have these themes, but you're not beat over the head with one side or the other. It's just, here's this issue, feel about it, or feel it, and then deal with it. And it's almost like what was it? The monk who set himself on fire in, I'm trying to remember where it was, but it's a famous picture everyone's seen from National Geographic. And
okay.
It was, in the 60s or 70s maybe, there was a monk like sitting crisscross in the street on fire. And he did it as a form of protest. And there's an old Robin Williams line talking about it where he's like, guy's on fire. He's like, and everyone's like, what the fuck are you doing? And he's like, making you deal with your shit. And so it's like that, to me, that's a lot of what's going on. And it's not necessarily, and I think that's where a lot of movies recently, not the soapbox, have been ineffective in that manner, where they're pushing you in one way or pulling you in another. And it's good if it's red meat for that base that's going to respond well to that. But in the case of a movie like Joker, or like a movie like I said, Night of the Living Dead, I guess, Halloween, it presents these issues in a very vague sort of way that kind of seep into your subconscious, and you don't have to think about it one way or the other, but you're going to have to deal with it at some point. And I think horror has always been good for that. And now we mentioned this, not to cut you off, but we mentioned the subconscious or the unconscious. Is there anything else about the mythology or about even Cochrane from the manuscript that we don't get to see in the film? Like, is there like anything else other than, we've talked about Challis, we've talked about the symbolism and the evils of Halloween and the mythology, but was there anything else of note, like about Cochran? Did it delve into his backstory anymore, or more about what he is and who he is?
Well, I'm looking through the book now. Cochran is a pretty sick character in the book. The way he manipulates people and finds what he's doing, he finds a lot of joy in it, which I guess, he doesn't. So it's sort of like that in the movie, but in the novel, you really get the sense that he's just sort of like this arch villain guy who takes a lot of pleasure in his hatred of children, basically. And it's almost like he wants to teach them a lesson. And he's got some really sort of controversial thoughts about women, I would say, and stuff like that. So he's sort of like the slimy kind of guy, and he goes deeper into his feelings about children and Halloween and how he's against it when he's got Challis tied up. So to answer your question, yeah, there's definitely more fleshed out in his character.
Was his issue with children and Halloween that it was kind of a mockery of what it once stood for him, or was it just the entire Americana, system in general?
It's like both. It's kind of like what you said about Joker, that it's you've got the Antifa and the Trump people, and it sort of calls out both sides. So to answer your question, I would say that the book calls out both sides here too. You've got him calling out children for being ignorant and being annoying, and how Halloween has gotten very commercial. But on the other side, you also have this commentary about the American way of life. So he's calling out just about everything through this character.
Wow, man, I would love if I ever had the chance to read that.
You actually can read it online. I can send you a link for that, but yeah. It is a great read. And unfortunately, the book is not. It's not as accessible as it used to be. Dennis and I were trying to get the book back in print before he died, and that's something that I would like to do so that more people could read it, because it really is an awesome read. And somebody who's, like I said before, somebody who's read so much of his work, I think that in many ways this is the best thing he's written, because not only is his vocabulary and use of description very rich, but I also feel that he has a lot to say in terms of social commentaries about children, about parents being worried about their children, about greed, about the American dream, about symbolism, such as how he uses even the sun as a symbol, and how he uses children as a symbol, what it means for the big picture. And there's a lot of social commentary about consumerism and surveillance, and about people we shouldn't trust. Like Tommy Lee Wallace said, there's he grew up in the hippie age, and there were a lot of people, and anybody who was dressed in a suit could not be trusted. And I don't know if you ever heard. Have you ever heard him talk about that?
No. I might have heard him say similar, but never that. That's hilarious.
Yeah. So Tommy Lee Wallace put his own fingerprint into it too, and by the time Etchison got the screenplay to work off of, a lot of it was Tommy Lee Wallace. But a lot of it's it's sort of about how these people in suits and ties, like the androids, cannot be trusted. Mm-hmm. And it sort of takes it to almost a comical level that, in the book, they really can't be trusted because they're literally out to kill you.
That's funny. Oh, man. So you said, what can you read online?
You can read the novel online.
Oh, okay.
I would definitely check it out.
I would love to. Is the Halloween 2 novel available too? Because I think he wrote that, right?
He did write that. I don't know what happened to the manuscript for that. It might still be part of his estate or with his wife. But I think you can read the Halloween 2 novel. It's not nearly as good as the third one. And I'm not just saying that as somebody who likes Halloween 3, the movie, and likes the anthology idea, et cetera, et cetera. You could tell that with the writing, even if Halloween 3 doesn't seem like your cup of tea for those of you who are listening, he really does an outstanding job writing the Halloween 3 novel. The Halloween 2 novel isn't bad. There are a few extra scenes, like with the producer of the news, and a scene where she's alone in the car, and Etchison puts his own spin on that stuff too. It's a really good read. I would just say that when it came time for Halloween 3, like I was telling you earlier, Brian, it's almost as if fate put this storyline into his hands that played right into the hands of what he'd always liked to write about. And I think that's why the vocabulary, the writing, the description is so rich, and how he really goes to town, not just with getting into Challis's head, but he also goes to town with these themes and these symbolisms and these ongoing things that get us to be thinking about the big picture. So he really outdid himself with the third one. 2 is very well, it's very good, but
it's him.
3 is just an exceptional work of his.
Man, all right, I got to check that out. If there's anything I can do to help, like try to, I don't know how you would get it back in print, but if there's anything I can do to help, let me know.
Yeah, definitely. I think the first thing we need to do real quickly is to figure out who owns the rights to them. And Dennis, unfortunately, did not know that.
To the novels themselves?
Yes, we believe that Malik Akkad might be the person who owns the rights to them. We would love to get a hold of him, and I would love to get a hold of him, and I mean we as the fans,
right?
To find out, if he indeed owns them, because John Carpenter told his agent or somebody who told me that he no longer has any control over that. Pumpkin Pie Productions put out Halloween 2 and 3, and I think he sold that around 1987, 88 to the Akkad family.
Yeah, I was going to say around when they basically he and Etchison presented the screenplay for Halloween 4, and they said no thank you, and Carpenter and Hill signed off on everything, I think then. So 86, 87.
Yeah.
So
that's my newest thing, just trying to find out who owns the rights to them, and when we do find that person, if we can try to get these books back into print,
or even developed into like a comic book or something. Doesn't Carpenter have Storm King Productions?
I'm not sure about that.
I think Sandy King, his wife, is like his partner in that, and they have a comic book line. Because he just, I don't know if it's through Storm King, but I know he just did a Joker comic.
Oh, okay. And I pitched the idea of turning one of the novels. I said to Dennis, what do you think about the idea of a graphic novel? And he loved it. So I would love to get an artist to put together some of these scenes, especially the scenes that are not in the movie, to really paint a picture literally of what these scenes look like. So if I ever do figure out the rights to them and I can get them back in print, which Dennis and I were working on doing, and I was willing to go through all the legwork and so that the owner didn't have to do anything, sort of being licensed to me. One thing that I would definitely love to do is to get some of this visually onto the page.
And I also have a friend of a friend who's a horror comic writer. He's a comic book writer. He specializes in horror comics. So hey, man, that would be just something really cool. It's a pipe dream, but if we could put that together, I'm sure Dirk Manning would appreciate it.
Yep, and I think Dennis would appreciate it too, wherever he is. But he was a really cool guy, fun to talk to, very engaging, and it would be a pleasure to put this stuff back into print in his memory.
Especially, was he aware of and I know I've kept you longer than I thought I would, and we'll wrap it up in just a second, but
sure.
Was he aware of the kind of resurgence in popularity in the Halloween 3 becoming a cult classic, and the book is actually popular in fan circles? Was he aware of any of that?
He was aware of it. And by the way, one thing he told me was that Halloween 3, the novel, was on every newsstand in the country, which I thought, that blew me away. But, back then there was a lot of hope for Halloween 3. It didn't work out. But to answer your question, he was aware of what became of it. They had some high hopes in 1982, didn't work out, but through the years it really got a cult following. And I was surprised that Dennis knew a little bit about that. And he was impressed by the devotion to Halloween 3.
Man, that's awesome. Again, I'm sad that he's no longer here, and was a friend of yours. I'm happy that you were able to befriend him and have some of these conversations and make that connection, because, as a fan, and it seems like he's a quality human being too, but as, a fan, it's interesting when you become a fan of something and then you get close to it in a way and you actually gain a genuine friendship out of it. It's something that those of us who've trolled around message boards for 15 years or so know in some cases, but in this, it's really fascinating when not only do you make a friend, but you actually get to talk to them about this great work that you've been a fan of. But
oh yeah, definitely. And Etchison, he shared stories about being on the set of Prince of Darkness, and he talked about Donald Pleasance, and he made jokes and gave all these kinds of insights, and it was a pleasure to hear his stories. He had a lot of really fun stories to tell, and it's very special that I became friends with the man who wrote my favorite thing ever written.
Man, that's awesome. Speaking of favorite, man, anytime, open seat, if you ever want to come back and talk horror, especially stuff like this, open seat whenever you want it.
I would love to. Thank you, Brian, for the invitation. I really appreciate that.
No problem, man. We've been kind of talking back and forth, been acquaintances for a little while, and I'm glad to call you a friend, and I hope we can do this again.
Yes, I hope so too, my friend.
Any plugs, any Facebook groups, anything that you manage that you want to call attention to?
Yes, I manage as an admin the group on Facebook, Halloween. It's just called Halloween. We have 14,000 members. We're the largest independent Halloween group on Facebook. And I'd like to give a shout out to them and, plug this podcast and, plug the group. And also Halloween series memes is another thing that I manage. And
those 6 times memes, every time, like, it's one of those jokes where, like, you see a bunch and you're like, okay, it's getting long in the tooth. And then one hits your feed, and it just makes me fall out laughing.
Oh, I know. Yeah, I'm not responsible for them, but they are funny, and so are the Bucky memes.
yeah, man, that's another good one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd appreciate the plug, and I'll try to put the links in the description for the podcast so that when it goes out on iTunes and Podcast Addict and Spotify, that the links to the Facebook groups are in there too.
Yeah, I'll definitely promote the podcast in general, not just this episode on my group pages, and I really think that what you're doing is really neat.
Thank you very much, man.
Yeah.
Like I said, anytime you want, you're welcome to come back. I know my co-host sometimes has things come up because he's in a couple bands and things like that. So if I need you, I'll drop you a line. I'll try to give you a heads up, but anytime you want.
Oh, sure. There's always something we can talk about. So thank you again for having me. I really appreciate it, and it's been fun.
Same here, man. Have a good night. Take it easy.
You too. Good night.
All right, boys and girls, that was my man Vincent C. from Salt Lake City, all the way in Utah, talking about Halloween 3, the Etchison manuscript, and all sorts of stuff. So I hope you enjoyed this episode of the podcast. If you did, please like and subscribe wherever you're listening, whether it's iTunes, whether it's Podcast Addict, whether it's iHeartRadio, Spotify, Google Music. Anyone has access to it at this point. So make sure you like and subscribe. Share it with other friends of yours that enjoy horror movies, especially Halloween 3 with this episode. And if you want to follow us, you can follow my regular co-host, Benny _/ on Twitter and on Instagram at Benny/777. You can follow me at BShowBrian. That's on Twitter and Instagram at the same handle. So we will be back next week. I don't know what we're talking about yet. trying to do some fun stuff, and hopefully we'll do more stuff like this as time permits and time goes on. But again, I want to thank my friend Vinny C. from Salt Lake City for being on the show tonight, and for sharing some of the details of not only his relationship with Dennis Etchison, but of the manuscript and what went into the story as well. So for everybody else, go watch some horror movies, read some horror stuff. If you find anything, you can send it my way at bshowbrian@gmail.com. Other than that, this is Horror Reanimated. I'm B Show Brian J. See you